There are games that you play, finish, uninstall, and eventually forget. And then there are games that somehow keep calling you back years later. Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Wildlands is one of those games for me. Greetings, my humble subjects, it's Fire on here, and welcome back to another video on Game Talk. I absolutely love this game, and honestly, a huge part of that love comes from the theme, the setting, and that feeling of simply being dropped into a massive world and being told, alright, Ghost, figure it out. Bolivia is beautiful. The open world is packed with things to discover, and the combination of military operations, exploration, stealth, and absolute chaos creates a playground that I can spend hours in without even realizing how much time has passed. So, today we are going to go deep into Wildlands. The story, the world, the gameplay, the graphics, the freedom it gives you, the things it gets completely wrong, and why, despite all that, I still think this is one of Ubisoft's most enjoyable open world games. So let's start with the story and the setting, because Wildlands immediately throws us into a pretty interesting situation. The game takes place in a near future version of Bolivia, where a massive drug cartel called Santa Blanca has essentially transformed the country into a narco state. The cartel isn't just selling drugs, it has influence over politicians, military forces, police, businesses, and entire communities. At the top of this pyramid is El Sueño, the charismatic, religious, and completely terrifying leader of Santa Blanca. And your job as part of the Ghost is basically to dismantle this entire organization piece by piece. The Ghosts are sent into Bolivia after the murder of a DEA agent. And rather than simply marching into the country with an army, you're operating as a 4-person special operations team. The idea is simple: remove the cartel's infrastructure, eliminate or capture key figures, disrupt their operations, and eventually bring El Sueño down. And I actually really like the structure because the story doesn't force you down one straight corridor. Instead, you're looking at a massive cartel hierarchy and you're deciding which part of that hierarchy you want to attack first. And that brings us to one of Wildlands' most interesting ideas. The world itself is basically your mission menu. Instead of saying mission A, then B, then C, the game gives you regions controlled by different branches of Santa Blanca. You might be targeting a weapon supplier, a security chief, a smuggling operator, or a production facility, or one of cartel's more influential lieutenants. Take down enough of these targets and eventually you work your way toward the big bosses. It creates this satisfying feeling that you are actually dismantling an organization rather than simply completing unrelated missions. Now, is the story going to win awards for its writing? Probably not. Some of the dialogues can be cheesy, some characters feel like they belong in a slightly exaggerated action movie, and the narrative occasionally struggles to make the stakes feel as serious as they should. Even GameSpot's original review criticized the story as a relatively basic revenge-driven narrative. But here's the thing: Wildlands isn't really at its strongest when you're sitting through a cutscene. It's at its strongest when the story gives you an objective and then gets out of your way. Because the real star of Wildlands is Bolivia itself. This is one of those open worlds where I genuinely enjoy traveling around without having a specific objective. You've got mountains, deserts, forests, rivers, villages, farms, highways, military installation, cartel compounds, and massive stretches of countryside. And the environments aren't just there to look pretty, they actually influence how you approach missions. A mountainous region might give you an excellent sniper position. A dense forest can let you disappear from an enemy patrol. A highway can become the perfect place for an ambush, or you can simply do what every wildland player eventually does: steal a random helicopter and completely abandon whatever mission you were supposed to be doing. You know you have done it. I know I've done it. We all know we have done it. The scale of this world was one of Wildlands' biggest selling points when it launched. Ubisoft built a massive open world military sandbox, and the game gives you more than 60 vehicles to travel around it, including cars, trucks, helicopters, boats, and motorcycles. And that freedom is important because Wildlands doesn't constantly scream at you, "This is the correct way to play." Instead, it gives you the tools and lets you decide how ridiculous or tactical you want to be. And that brings us perfectly into the gameplay, because this is where Wildlands become addictive. At its core, Wildland is a third-person tactical shooter, but it is also an open-world sandbox. You have various ranges of weapons like assault rifles, snipers, SMGs, shotguns, LMGs, explosive drones, and a ridiculous amount of attachments and customization. Pardon my mispronunciation there. You can customize your ghost, your weapons, and your gear, and the game gives you a huge amount of freedom over your loadout. But the most important weapon in your arsenal isn't actually a gun, it's information. The drone is arguably one of the most useful tools in the entire game. You can send it into an enemy base, tag enemies, identify supplies, locate alarms, mark generators, and basically turn an unknown compound into a tactical puzzle. And I love this because it gives you that feeling of actually preparing for an operation. You aren't necessarily rushing straight into the base, you are looking at the environment, checking enemy positions, figuring out where the alarms are, and then deciding how you're going to approach. And then there's one of my favorite mechanics, Sync Shot. Mark several enemies, command your AI teammates to fire, and suddenly three enemies disappear simultaneously. It's simple, but it makes you feel like a special force operator. And if you're playing co-op with friends, that entire concept becomes even better because now you've got four actual humans capable of coordinating attacks. The game supports solo play with AI teammates as well as co-op play with up to three friends. And honestly, this is where violence reaches another level. Imagine this: you're on a hill overlooking a cartel base. One friend is covering the main entrance, another is positioned behind the compound. Someone else has sneaked through towards the generator. You mark targets, everyone waits. 3, 2, 1, boom! Four enemies go down almost simultaneously. You move in, disable the alarms, freeze the building, steal the intel, disappear before the cartel even knows what happened. That is Wildlands at its absolute best. But here's where I think the game deserves even more credit. You don't have to play it that way. You can go completely stealthily. You can snipe enemies from 100 meters away, and you can sneak through a back of compound. You can sabotage alarms. You can use suppressed weapons. You can use distractions, or you can completely lose your mind, fly a helicopter directly into the compound, start shooting rockets everywhere, and somehow survive long enough to complete the mission. And both approaches can be fun. That's what I mean when I say Wildlands lets you counter the game as you see fit. The world isn't constantly dictating your strategy. The mission might say destroy the convoy, but it doesn't necessarily care whether you snipe the driver, plant explosive, hijack the vehicle, call in a rebel ambush, or simply ram the trunk off a cliff. The game provides the objective and you create the solution. Now, is this freedom perfect? Absolutely not. There are moments when the open world formula becomes repetitive, and you will eventually notice this because you are doing variations of familiar activities. Steal this, destroy that, interrogate someone, follow someone, eliminate someone, protect something, rescue someone, so on and so forth. And because the game is so enormous that repetition can become noticeable. It was one of the most common criticism from critics at launch. IGN praised the sandbox freedom and seamless co-op but pointed out weaknesses in mission variety and vehicle physics, while GameSpot felt the enormous map diluted some of the tactical focus. But personally, I think there is an important distinction here. Wildlands can become repetitive if you're treating it like a checklist. If you're trying to clear every icon as quickly as possible, yes, you're going to burn yourself out. But if you're treating it like a sandbox and allowing yourself to experiment, the same mission can feel completely different depending on how you want to pursue it. And that brings us to the combat. The shooting itself is satisfying, but Wildlands isn't necessarily trying to get the most mechanically realistic military simulator ever made. Weapons feel powerful, enemies react to headshots, and are extremely effective, and positioning matters. But the game also gives you plenty of room to experiment with different weapon types. You can build a stealth focused loadout, a long range sniper setup, aggressive assault build, or something designed for close quarter combat. The cover system, however, can occasionally feel clunky. Vehicle handling is another area where the game can make you question whether you're driving a military vehicle or a shopping cart with four wheels. And the AI can sometimes behave like it has absolutely no idea what's happening around it. You might spend 5 minutes planning the perfect infiltration, only for one enemy to stare directly at you while you are standing 3 feet away behind a bush. But then again, sometimes the ridiculousness is part of the fun. Because Wildlands has this strange ability to move from elite military operation to four idiots with helicopters within about 30 seconds. And I wouldn't have it done any other way. Now let's talk about exploration because this is probably the biggest reason I keep coming back to the game. This is something incredibly satisfying simply driving across Bolivia. I mean, you can leave your base, choose a random direction, and just go. You will encounter civilians, cartel patrols, rebel fighters, convoys, wildlife, roadblocks, and random firefights. Sometimes you're heading towards a mission and suddenly you see a cartel convoy transporting supplies. You stop the vehicle, take them out, steal their resources, and continue your journey. That kind of emergent gameplay is what makes an open world feel alive. And visually, Wildlands still holds up surprisingly well. Obviously, this is a 2017 release, so you're not looking at modern 2026 graphical showcase in any respect. But the environmental variety does a tremendous amount of heavy lifting. Sunset over mountains, foggy forests, desert village at night, huge valleys, and dense vegetation can make the game genuinely beautiful. Even years after release, players continue to praise the game's landscape and atmosphere. And now, interestingly enough, Wildlands has received a major anniversary update in 2026. Ubisoft's recent update introduced improvements including 4K 60 FPS, support on current gen consoles, enhanced lighting and shadows, sharper image quality, and additional gameplay customization. So, if you thought Wildlands was simply a game that had been abandoned to history, apparently Ubisoft had other plans. The new customization options are actually quite interesting because they push the idea of player freedom even further. You can adjust gameplay parameters such as authentic reloading, weapon loadouts, and friendly fire. And honestly, authentic reloading is one of my favorites addition to the game. While also controlling HUD elements and even environmental conditions such as time of the day and weather. That might sound like a small thing, but it fits Wildland perfectly because one of the game's greatest strength has always been letting the players decide what kind of experience they want. And then there is Ghost Mode, which is basically Wildland saying you think you are tactical, prove it. Permadeath changes the entire way you approach the game. Suddenly, the random firefight isn't funny anymore. That helicopter crash isn't funny anymore. Running into a cartel base with an LMG and no plan isn't funny anymore. Well, it might still be funny, but only after you stop screaming. So yeah, Ghost Mode is one of those additions that demonstrates how flexible Wildlands can be. You can play it as a relatively casual open world shooter, or you can increase the challenge and start treating every decision like it matters. And that's the thing I appreciate most about Wildlands. It can meet you where you want to play. Want to play casually? You can. Want to stealth through the entire base without being detected? Absolutely. Want to play with three friends and coordinate like an actual squad? Even better. Want to spend 40 minutes driving around Bolivia taking screenshot because the sunset looks ridiculous? Somehow, yes, that works too. Now let's get into the reviews because Wildlands has always been an interesting game when it comes to critical reception. When it initially launched in 2017, critics generally landed somewhere around good but flawed. Metacritic currently lists the game at a 70 critic score on PC, with all platform score varying around that range depending on the platform. GameSpot gave it a 7 out of 10, praising the satisfaction of coordinated infiltration and stealth but criticizing the way the huge open world could dilute the game's tactical identity. IGN gave it a 7.9 out of 10, highlighting the sandbox gameplay and seamless co op while criticizing things like mission variety and vehicle physics. And PC Gamer was considerably harsher towards the solo experience, essentially arguing that Wildlands was much more enjoyable when played co op. And honestly, I think those reviews tell us something important. Critics weren't necessarily saying this is a bad game. They were just saying Wildlands has a great idea with some very obvious Ubisoft era open world problems. And that's a fair criticism. But here's where the conversation becomes interesting when you look at the fans. On Steam, the game currently sits at, sorry, on Steam, the game currently sits at a mostly positive, with roughly around 79% of tens of thousands of English language reviews that I could find. They are marked positive. That's a pretty significant difference between the game's critical score and its long-term player reception. And if you spend some time looking at the community, a pattern starts to appear. Players repeatedly praise the atmosphere, the open world, the customization, the tactical freedom, and especially co-op play. Recent discussions still describe it as an incredibly fun game, with players often comparing its overall experience favorably against Breakpoint. And I think that's explained its reputation today. Back in 2017, people were judging it as the next big Ghost Recon game. In 2026, people are increasingly judging it as one of the best open world tactical sandbox Ubisoft has ever made. Those are two very different standards. The game isn't perfect, of course. The story could be stronger, the mission structure can become repetitive, and enemy AI can be questionable. Vehicle sometimes or majorly actually every time behave like they were designed by someone who has never actually seen a role. And if you're playing completely alone, some of the magic of co-op gameplay or coordinated tactical gameplay naturally disappears. But when everything comes together, man, this game is so special. And I think the biggest compliment I can give this game is that it creates stories that aren't necessarily written by the developers. The game might give you a mission to destroy a convoy, but you decide how the story happens. Maybe you sneak into the convoy route, maybe your friend drives a truck straight into the target, maybe you snipe, maybe you hijack. Maybe everything goes perfectly for 15 minutes, then your friend accidentally shoots a civilian, the entire cartel goes on alert, a helicopter arrives, three armored vehicles, and everybody starts screaming on Discord. And suddenly your carefully planned stealth mission has turned into the Bolivian equivalent of World War III. And honestly, those are the moments I remember. That's why, despite all its flaws, I still have such a soft spot for this game. It isn't the deepest military simulator, it isn't the greatest narrative driven shooter, isn't the most technically perfect open world games. but it combines an enormous world, tactical gameplay, exploration, customization, and like vehicle stealth co-op, and like there is so much player freedom into it, and all in a ridiculously small one package, and it's easy to get lost into it. And maybe that's what makes the game like so good. That's why Wildlands aged so well. It understands something that a lot of open world games sometimes forget. The player doesn't always need more content. Sometimes the player just needs better tools and the freedom to do something interesting with them. Give them a beautiful world. Like, give me a beautiful world, give me a sniper rifle, give me a helicopter, give me like three friends and a cartel compound where like somewhere in the mountains, and then just let me figure it out. So, is it worth playing today? Absolutely. I'll say absolutely. If you want a tightly scripted military campaign with a deep emotional story, this probably isn't the game for you. But if you want an open world tactical playground where you can explore, experiment, sneak, shoot, drive, fly, improvise, and occasionally turn a perfectly controlled operation into a complete chaos, well, Wildlands is still incredibly easy to recommend. And with the game's recent 2026 anniversary improvements, including enhanced visuals, I think so. This old ghost has received a surprisingly fresh coat of paint. For me, Wildlands isn't about perfection, it's about freedom. It's about that feeling when you look across the map, pick a location, load your weapon, jump into a helicopter, and think, alright, let's see what happens. And 9 times out of 10, something absolutely ridiculous is gonna happen. But that's Ghost Recon Wildlands. That's the experience, that's the chaos. And honestly, that's why I keep coming back to it. So, what do you think about Wildlands? Is it still the best modern Ghost Recon, or do you think Breakpoint eventually surpassed it? Let me know in the comments because I genuinely want to hear what you guys think. And if you enjoyed the review, drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and as always, stay hot.